Hello and welcome to Woman Up, the podcast series from Procreate Project. Woman Up speaks to and about artists, academics, writers and activists, midwives, carers and more. All mothers or parents and all women or non-binary people. Those challenging ideas and ideals, questioning assumptions and provoking social change. The platform is dedicated to the people and women that are taking risks, to the ones trying to change current structures founded on biases that have to do with gender, caring responsibilities, race, and the integration of the private and the public. We will have conversations about lived experiences, achievements, and aspirations. We'll also share campaigns and awareness around crucial intersectional struggles and subjects. Hello and welcome to Woman Up. I'm Susan Merrick, and today I'm speaking with Dr. Frances Hatherley, who is a writer, researcher, and curator. Her writing provokes critical engagements with working-class women's subjectivities, creativities, artworks, and notions of a classed aesthetics. In 2018, she was awarded her PhD from Middlesex University titled Sublime Dissension, a working-class anti-Pygmalion aesthetics of the female grotesque, examining the intersections of class and gender in the formations of grotesque and sublime femininities in art and visual culture. In 2020, she published her first book on Jo Spence with a foreword by Marina Warner titled Class Slippers, Jo Spence, Fantasy, Photography and Fairy Tales. Frances has been involved in curating several exhibitions in the UK, and she's currently working on her second book, exploring her conception of the anti-Pygmalion in representations of women in art and popular culture, with a focus on the practices of working class cultural workers in Britain. Hello, Fran, how are you?
Hello, Susan. I'm really good. Lovely to be talking to you.
Lovely to have you on here as well. So in preparation for our chat, as you know, actually, I read your PhD thesis as well as your book, Class Slippers. And as a working class woman, growing up working class and trying to figure out how that affects me, even with the privilege I have now, it was a breath of fresh air to read your work, to be able to relate to so much and to find some really good references as well that I could go to. So thank you for that, firstly.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for reading it.
Oh, no, it's really good. And it's been nice to, I shared as well online, and quite a few people have been interested in reading it. So hopefully they have been too.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah. I'd like to dive right in with the PhD, actually, if that's all right.
Yeah,
so you focus on the anti-Pygmalion. Can you explain a bit more about what you mean by that concept?
Yeah, so the anti-Pygmalion is sort of a phrase borrowed from Ovid's poem, and I always, before I say it, pause, because I very often pronounce it wrong, which I guess is like a typical sort of autodidact trait. But also, I think more famously, it's the George Bernard Shaw play that was then filmed. And it is the process of taking a working class woman and kind of, I was going to say tarting her up, but that's the opposite, kind of classing her up into a lady. And I hate this, and I hate the process, and I hate that it's meant to be a good thing. And it's, you know, we've got TV shows that have this kind of process where you get someone who looks, you know, in quotes, rough or tarty, or they're not dressing with respectability, or they're showing too much of their body. And then you kind of middle class them up. And this kind of going from bad to good, or you have no education, you go through university and now you're good. And I felt very much like, well, no, I don't want to do that. What if we don't do that? What if we hold on to aspects of our speech, accent? What if we don't soften up our accents? I mean, I've got a southern accent, so I think everyone sort of north of London assumes that you're that you're posh if you're southern. And I guess, like we've talked about this before, that every time I meet a northerner, I think they're like a socialist, working class socialist. Yeah. It's terrible kind of assumptions from childhood, I guess. But yeah, where was I? So basically, that what if we don't soften ourselves or kind of make ourselves respectable? What if instead we kind of hold on to these things that we're meant to kind of lose along our journey to kind of, you know, respectability? And so the idea of, so the Ovid play is Pygmalion, and so is the George Bernard Shaw play. And then the film is My Fair Lady. So I was like, no, it's the anti-Pygmalion. So I'm also not saying that all working class women are rowdy, have strong accents, or dress in provocative ways or are loud. But the point is that femininity is constructed along gendered lines. And so if you happen to have an accent that isn't kind of southern neutral middle class, or you happen to dress in a way that shows your body or is kind of loud, or you're opinionated, or you don't present in a kind of discreet European middle class, thin, white, able-bodied way, that your femininity is wrong. So I'm not saying that all working class women fit into these tropes, but those of us that have done and that do, I'm saying no, we're fine as we are. So that's the anti-Pygmalion.
Awesome. Thank you, Fran. That's lovely and clear as well. So you and I have talked about our own class, both being working class, or at least growing up working class with working class parents.
Yeah.
For you, how does this shape your focus, and what are the benefits and challenges of this to your work and your working life?
I think it's really tricky because I think, as we've talked about, we've both kind of moved through from one class to another and find ourselves not quite comfortable in the position we're at. I think that people very often want to, one thing my work does is I'm not trying to say what being working class is, because it's boring, and also it shuts it down. It means that people like us, for example, well, you're not really working class anymore, are you? So you don't need to speak on this. And actually that erases, 20, 25 years, 30 years of our lives. And also it assumes that you can't be an artist in working class, which is not true. You can't get an education or a higher education to be working class, and you can. And so I don't know, I guess that it's always there. And I kind of think about my class identity as working class background, because my kind of family income would definitely move me from working class to middle class. I enjoy the benefits of not being poor. I enjoy childcare and, being able to afford to take my child to nursery, which means I get to write, and all of these things which are benefits and privileges. And they should be for everybody, firstly, of not being poor, and I know that not everyone from working class backgrounds is poor, but we were poor growing up. And so it's kind of there all the time. And it's what shapes my reception of discussions about education, discussions about childcare, discussions about art, discussions about access, but in a way that's kind of, I'm sort of fighting for my younger self, or fighting for girls like me in my writing, that, well, just because I'm currently not struggling in those ways, I'm still shaped by those experiences. And I also think that it's very, very obvious when you're in the arts or you're a writer that many of the people around you haven't had those experiences. So they look at work made by working class people and they miss so much. There's so much they just can't see. And that's not because they're bad, or, they're Tories, or their politics is dodgy. It's because they just haven't had those experiences, so that they can't see those things. They can't see what's being shown to them. And often, these works are received like with, just stereotypical responses. So I think my work is a lot of like, hang on a minute, let's look at that again. Let's think about how we feel when we look at that. Is it horrible what we're looking at? Or have you just been taught to think that working class lives must be horrible? So I think it's a sort of corrective and providing a sort of alternative way of looking and thinking about works made by working class people, because they have been made invisible. There's huge hurdles to access, but also representations of working class people in art and TV are often, again, treated with stereotypes. So I'm sort of trying to offer alternatives and a corrective to, better ways we might think about people that aren't posh on telly and in books and in art.
That's That's really interesting. I've got a load of post-it notes behind the computer that I'm going to look at for my questions. And I had one that specifically talked about the term you used, working class tourists, or just tourists in general, I think, when looking at working class lives.
Yeah.
And then, and in your PhD, you talk about this and how it's so interesting that when we see art or something on the TV programs or anything, where the focus is on working class lives, it's called tourism by people who are critiquing it because they assume that everybody watching it is a tourist to that life, has not grown up with that life. So that's making massive assumptions on the artist or, TV viewers and audiences as middle class rather than working class themselves. So can you talk a little bit more about that, about these assumptions of middle class audiences and how that affects?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that's frustrated me for my whole adult life, probably before that, is this use of like we and us when you're talking about literature or books or art. There's always this like us and them. And it's frustrating reading these things. And I guess it's a gendered thing as well. Like you can look at it and the assumption is that you're male. And you kind of go, hang on a minute, that's not an us, that's you. And finding yourself being the them all the time. So in my writing, I always like to say us. And what I mean is like working class people, because we are reading these books, we are watching the films, we are doing these things. I think this idea of class tourism, I mean, yes, it's a thing, but also it's a way of saying over there, that life that's another world. And it means you don't even have to think about what's actually happening, that no, this isn't another world, this is like next door, this is down the road, this is in your city, in your town, it's not another world, it's not another country. And there's this kind of, when I was writing about Richard Billingham's work, which he's the one that's kind of a lot of class tourism, he's taking pictures of his family. They're intimate pictures and they're hard to look at, but they're also warm and affectionate and loving and intimate and tender. But when people look at it, they don't see that. They don't want to see that you could look at someone who isn't, conventionally beautiful or doesn't look like the idealized mother figure who is kind of, clean and respectable and polished, and she might look a bit tired, but she's very happy, and this kind of these images of motherhood. Instead, you see someone smoking a fag, having a drink, whose lipstick is a bit of a mess, whose house is maybe a bit of a mess, but the house is also decorated beautifully, with such care. There's colored wallpaper, there's patterned cushions and all of this bric-a-brac that's just written off as like tacky. But for her, obviously, she's taken great joy in creating this space. So instead of kind of thinking of it as like a visitor, which is so alienating and so dehumanizing, instead to kind of look at it and go, no, these are intimate pictures. I've just not experienced that. Like we look at art all the time. People watch foreign films about people that are literally in another country. And they're not like, oh, I can't relate. Because they're like, oh, it's the human experience. It's universal. Like, it doesn't matter. I can read the subtitles. But why is it that if you're looking at an image of a working class woman who is fat, who's smoking a fag, you're like, oh, this is like, this must be some sort of tourism because it's completely out of my experience. And I think it's an unwillingness to go there, to let the picture move you, to feel tenderness to this woman that actually we've been taught to despise because she's probably on benefits and she's overweight. How dare she? So it keeps you at a distance, terms like this, when we're talking about lives that are near to us, probably, or lives that we've experienced or that our partners have experienced or our friends have experienced or, our work colleagues. Like, I think it's a distancing thing. Like, I'm not going to go there.
It's really, it's really emotive as well. And when I, from your work, seeing the Richard Billingham images again, I kind of looked into his work more and then watched the film that he made about his mum and dad. And it's definitely the case that because our education and the way that we're brought up, regardless of class, whatever school we're in, we're kind of brought up to feel shameful about working class, about those kinds of images and those lives. So I found it really emotive watching this film, and I've had that experience before, and I think I messaged you afterwards because it's the first time I've really realized why I feel that way. And a lot of the feeling is which I'm sure a lot of people share, there's like recognition. Well, there's kind of like the initial, shame, I'm embarrassed to watch this because I'm embarrassed for those people, which comes from being taught that you should be embarrassed. Then there's the recognition of, oh my God, they've got the same plates we had growing up. That's the same carpet. That is, that's the same wallpaper. That was my auntie. My auntie's, ashtray was always spilling over, and I loved, and I felt so comfortable in her living room. And then elements of it that I'm totally recognizing, and then feeling double shame for recognizing it and thinking, oh, well, I'm supposed to feel shame about that, and now I recognize it as part of my life or my family's life, so then I feel extra shame, and it's really messy, isn't it?
It's really messy because it's exposure. It's like showing what you're not meant to show to those people, or like, teachers or social workers or any authority figures that are going to judge you. Like, don't show them that shit. And so I get it when people are cross with Richard Billingham. I mean, this is like 20 years, it's more than 20 years ago, because it's like the mid-90s. People were cross with him, like, you shouldn't have done that to your family. And actually, I'm really glad that he did, because I mean, the way that I think also it's worth saying that the way that his photos were used when they were shown was about sensation. I mean, Saatchi used them. They were meant to be kind of shown very small, very intimately, and they were fucking blown up huge. So every bit of cat piss on the floor or fag butt could be seen. It was meant to provoke a sort of spectacle and sensation, but they were meant to be intimate, small pictures. And if you think about that when you look at the images, I think it changes the way you think about them. But there is an element of like, you've let us down, you're airing the dirty laundry in public. But I'm always a fan of airing dirty laundry in public. I think that silence and secrecy and shame has no use for anyone ever. And so showing these, and also I think there is an element of like, well, why should I be ashamed? I think there, in interviews with Richard Billingham, there's a lot of, well, why shouldn't I show my family? Why shouldn't I show my life? And it's like, no, because you're meant to be ashamed. You're meant to change your accent, go to university, pretend like it never happened. And so I agree, like when I first looked at the pictures, my face went red, my cheeks were flushed. I was like, shit, is anyone, I was looking at the book in my college library, like, looking around, seeing if anyone had sort of seen what I was looking at. But I also felt so excited that these were contemporary pictures of working class people, like not that long ago. So I was at college in like the early 2000s, and I think the book was printed in like 98. So it was like, this is happening right now. And this kid's like published a book about photography, and that was really exciting. So I think it's like, well, if you don't like the pictures because they show poverty, fucking get rid of poverty then. Poverty's shameful. It's shameful to be abandoned by the social. It's shameful that, like Richard Billingham's dad, I think, was a miner, or he worked in a factory and was kind of made redundant. Like, look at that stuff. Look at Thatcher. That's shameful. Don't look at people who are trying to make the best of things, who are trying to find pleasures where they can, and think, oh, that's shameful, don't show it. Like, that's the wrong way around. So but the pictures do contain that element of like, oh, this is a lot. And that's kind of why I also talk about the sublime, because it's not just like, oh, they're just beautiful pictures. They also provoke a deeper feeling of kind of like, oh shit, this is really stirring something up, and it's very powerful. So
Yeah, it is very powerful, and the way that you talk about it is really powerful as well. So if you don't mind, I'd quite like to talk about how you see motherhood and class. Because I hope you don't mind me saying, but you're expecting your second on the way.
Yeah,
so
very,
full
very
in the throes of
right
of motherhood. So I don't know which angle I want to come at, but I'm staring at a post-it here which says my kids are middle class, and it's a struggle. It's a struggle, as well as the working class kid in me being so happy that they've got all this privilege, but also being like, they're going to be such spoilt little shit.
I know what you mean. I've got two stepkids, and I had to stop myself saying to them things like, that's not being poor, or I never had this, because, you know, the babies that I have had, well, one and soon to have another, they're going to grow up middle class, because they won't have known anything else. And I don't know, it does weird me out. It does weird me out, because then I'm fully established within the middle classes. But yeah, I mean, I think that the experience of motherhood is massively shaped by class position and access to money. Like, even before you have the baby, options to do kind of NHS run prenatal care versus private stuff like NCT, which is really expensive. I think it's like nearly 100 quid. The classes are much smaller, so of course you get like more one-on-one experience. You can talk to the midwives that are explaining to you like the 3 stages of labor, or the different colors of baby's poo and what this might mean. And all of these sort of support systems are now private, or you have to pay for. And so even before you've had the baby, your class position, how much money you've got, determines your level of knowledge about birth, your confidence. And I think your confidence and your knowledge massively shape how you go into having a baby. Like, if you feel like, I don't know, what am I doing? I don't know what this means. And also you're in a position that your encounters with social workers, healthcare providers has not been positive in the past, or you felt judged, or on the back foot, then you're less likely to ask for help. So things like postnatal depression and postnatal anxiety are going to be like not diagnosed as much. So I think it affects every bloody aspect of being a mother. And being able to take my daughter to nursery, it's like she goes 4 days a week now. She's nearly 3. That means that I have time to write. I have time to think. I have time to work. And I mean, nurseries are so expensive that it's like, you know, you're kind of working for free. But if you have a job and you don't see it as kind of like, oh, this is my career that I need to keep peddling away on, what's the fucking point in doing it? Why not stay home with your kids and go on benefits? Because then you're not seeing them during the day, you're working for nothing. And, you know, with the price of nurseries, you're often working with a deficit in order to have them there, in order to work. So, yeah, I think that it's not easy. And if we had, you know, state-run free for all nurseries, it would massively equalise the experience of motherhood for women. You know, I was watching the Elena Ferrante adaptation with Olivia Cole. Have you seen it, The Lost Daughter?
No.
Well, it's basically like the older character is like in an Italian beach resort, and we see flashes of her younger self, and we know that she's had a large period where she didn't have a relationship with her daughters, that she'd just sort of done a runner, and her sort of regret around this. But we also see her in absolute rage because she's trying to write, she's a young academic, and there is no space and no time. And I think it's like, it's been talked a lot about, it's like sort of the ambivalence of motherhood or motherhood rage. And I think that she loves her kids, she wants to be with them, but she actually also wants something else. Mm-hmm. and that's something else, is to write, to publish, to go to academic conferences, but there's not the space. And I think that motherhood is so much harder when you're doing so many things at once. If you're just there, like I have Thursdays with my daughter and I try not to do any other work. Sometimes I will have to, but that's such a luxury. Sad to say it's a luxury. It should be like normal, that you have to do multiple things all the time when you're child rearing, because chasing around a toddler is so distracting. You can't be also, replying to emails and all of this stuff. And that causes the rage, that causes the tension, that causes the stress where you feel like you're failing at both jobs. And actually having the space to go, no, we're on your time. I'm just going to be with you.
Yeah.
That isn't a standard thing that you get as a mother. And so this sort of rage, I think, is to do with having to be productive on all bloody fronts.
And I think it's totally down to, so I've been talking to a friend of mine quite a lot about different family structures, for those who maybe don't or can't have kids, but want to be involved in parenting in some way. Yeah. But also for parents who find it really fucking hard within this, within the what's considered nuclear family, or finding it hard because life is just hard if you are in poverty or if you are on your own. And actually, if you consider different family structures where there are more adults around, immediately burdens are eased and
100%.
responsibilities are shared. And I think that there's probably a lot to think about in terms of class and that in those circumstances as well.
Yeah, like we need a village.
Yeah.
We need a village. And I think
but that's not considered respectable. What's considered respectable and middle class is that nuclear family.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And I think that although, I think kids do need you have your kind of primary people that you have your very close bond with. It's also so important and good for kids to have lots of trusted, respected adults in their lives that care about them. And, I was reading something the other day and it was like, it's not that you want to opt out of kind of parenting and going, oh, I need time. It's that you want people to opt in. You want help, you want support, you want to do it with other people. This just kind of like isolated one person and a child thing is really hard, and it's unnatural. Like, not to say that I'm not saying single mothers are unnatural. I'm saying doing it alone is unhelpful to you. It's really, really hard. And you need the support, you need people around you. And I think as we kind of move around cities, probably away from where we grew up, we lose that connection to family that can help. And it's a real bummer. But I agree. I think that, communal parenting styles, and it's not necessarily that you spread it equally among everybody, because I think that especially when they're little, they need that kind of one-on-one bond, but also that people are helping and people are involved. And I guess also that people fear judgment of family members. But I think, it's better to have it than not to have it, 100%. And like there's down my road, there's this, it's, I don't know, I think it's like a community run thing, and it's like midwives and breastfeeding specialists and postnatal physio people, and it's called The Village. And at first I was like, oh, what's this like? We are in a city, what's this about? It's called The Village. And then it kind of clicked, like it's called The Village because it's like for women that don't have a village. Like that's where you go, and they do like choir, and they organize all sorts of different things so that women have that community, that they are with other women, talking to other women. And I think once you are with each other, talking and sharing, the burden of like what you're going through is lessened dramatically. But unfortunately, a lot of these things are that you have to pay for. I think they run a lot of things for free, but other things that are a bit more specialist, you are paying for.
Yeah, we had loads in Aldershot via the Sure Start centres when I was having the kids. And it was totally about, building a tribe, having that, because like you say, I'd moved away from home, so I didn't have my family around. I had a little bit of my partner's family locally, but it's in our Western European culture, we are kind of taught you're supposed to just get on with it and cope and manage whatever your circumstances. Get on with it. Yeah. And it's been really wonderful. I've made quite a few Muslim friends recently who live in more extended families, or have done, and talking to them about having other family members living with them, and how that has been so essential when they've been having kids.
Oh my God.
Like, God.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to get my mum to like move in for a bit after this baby is born. But she's a radiographer, and I think her hospital do need her. But yeah, it's like, can you just stay for like the first 6 weeks? And I think that, in different times, like I think that's what her mum did. I think her mum kind of moved in with them for a bit. But yeah, like just you do need these structures of support. And I think what I saw a lot of with my first baby was all of these classes kind of filling a gap in where you would have like support from, say, family members or neighbors, that instead you just like fill your days with classes of like, you've got a really tiny baby, but you're going to like something that baby has no clue what's going on. But I think it's also this pressure of like mums having to be productive, like go to all of these classes, be productive, don't just sit at home. And it's like, your body's probably still healing. It takes months and months and months for your body to like feel remotely like it did before. You're figuring out like how to feed your baby, whether that's like breast or bottle, like it's complicated and you're figuring it out. And then you've got to like, look, everybody, I'm healthy and I've bounced back and I'm going to all these classes. And I think it's such a kind of capitalistic infiltration of motherhood that you have to look productive when you are raising a small human. Like, that's enough. Feed them, clothe them, make sure they're happy and warm and fed. That's the job. But no, you have to also be going, I'm taking my child to this class and this class, and look, I'm being so productive. And this kind of fear that people will see you as kind of lazy, or that you've not done enough, or maybe your house is a mess. And I think that is this feeling that we have to be working at all times. We have to be working and earning our keep. And I think that, that's capitalism. That's saying that like you have to, it's almost like you have to earn your maternity pay, like by finding other sources of work and
constantly prove your value.
Yeah, and also like giving your babies cultural capital, like, oh, well, my baby's learnt this, she'll do okay at preschool, and all of that shit. It's really like, I mean, classes are good in the sense that they get you out of the house, but this kind of push that you should be busy, it's like, no, too much.
Yeah. Sounds very sensible. Right, what else have I got on my post-its? So I have one here which says, 30 years after Spence's class shame work and phototherapy.
Oh, yeah.
Are we in a different position with regard to class and art representation?
No. No, I don't think so. So I know that there's been sort of new studies, and I'm going to blame it on being like nearly 9 months pregnant, but I can't remember the name of the person that did this study, an academic at maybe UCL, about like, now there are now like 6 classes, precariat, eminent service worker, all of these things. And if you're thinking about class as like an economic or socioeconomic category, and you're looking at the way that we all experience culture, how do we experience culture? You can have like no money and a 0-hour contract job, and if you live in a city, and you can still go to like the theatre, there's like £5 tickets. And especially like my stepdaughter, when she was at secondary school in southeast London, they used to take the kids on so many trips to like cultural institutions. It was like don't be intimidated by this stuff. This stuff is for everybody and it's for you. And I think that was so good, because it was like, yeah, this is on your doorstep and it belongs to you. This culture belongs to you. It's not separate. And so, yeah, like, it's not this, and also we have the internet. It's not the same where you just didn't like, the gatekeeping was more rigid. So yes, like, our access to culture has broadened. So it may feel like, oh, well, I enjoy this and this and this, so that must make me a bit posh, or like, I eat avocados, so, oh, look at me, I must be middle class. So those sorts of things, which are really just superficial, they don't really affect our ability to like earn money and be able to go on holiday and to have security in where we live, or where we, you know, housing security and all sorts of things. Like, those things are still really wobbly, you know, like renting is still, you're still getting screwed over. Education system is still racist and classist. Those things are still there. So the things that like Jo Spence and Rosie Martin are talking about, I think, are still in evidence. So in some ways, like, maybe we should be like, woohoo, we can now enjoy avocados while we're spending 90% of our wages on rent. But that doesn't really change the fundamentals of class inequalities. So I don't know, I think that the shame element, I think, is still there. When I watched the Sally Rooney adaptation of, is it Normal People? Yeah, Normal People. And you see the boy in it feeling absolute shame at moving from his town into what's the name? What's it called? The university that they go to. It's like quite a swish one.
I don't know, right?
It's gone from my mind. But anyway, they go to, like, you know, the Oxford Cambridge style, but Irish equivalent, Trinity. They go to Trinity. And his love interest, who's from a very big house and, you know, is quite well off, she is like a duck to water. She knows the language, she knows how to do it, and he doesn't. But he also, because he's very bright and he loves books and language and literature, he isn't quite at home in this town. And so he goes to university really hoping that, right, this will be my moment. This is when I get to be myself. And actually, he's surrounded by people that don't understand where he's coming from. They don't understand him. They see him as, you know, somebody who's done sports. So like, he's a jock. How can you be intellectual and someone who's done, you know, Irish football and be intellectual? Like, it doesn't compute. The things don't work together. So he's kind of treated as a bit of an oddball. But his experience of that is about class. It's class shame. And so those experiences, I mean, you know, like, I went to school quite a long time ago, but I was at university not that long ago, and I felt it. And it's in this book. It's very clear that Connell, the male character, feels it. And Lindsay Hanley, who's like writing in the 2000s about her experience, feels it. And then you've got Jo Spence and Rosie Martin talking about their experience in the 1950s. They feel it. So there is, and then Richard Hogarth, you know, talking about the scholarship boy and the absolute fear of being found out or pronouncing something wrong or letting your class background kind of seep through. There's that thread of continuity running all the way through. So I think as long as we have, you know, a massively unequal society that says, you know, these are the things you need to do in order to get ahead, this way of being is wrong, this way of talking is wrong, this way of expressing yourself is wrong, then of course we're going to feel that shame. Like being taught, you know, having teachers talking to you about success at school, like, if you don't do these things, your life is shit. That is going to instill shame, because you'll go, oh, what, like my parents? Are you saying their life's worthless? So those sorts of narratives around success and failure and good and bad life choices, and what happens if you don't make those choices, or what happens if you don't get into, you know, in quotes, good university, they set up these, you know, good and bad positions of like how you want your life to be. And they end up telling you that if you remain working class, you failed. So I think it's kind of, there are things that have changed during, it's like 40 years, I guess, since Jo Spence was kind of having those, writing those things, having those conversations, doing that work. But yeah, I think there are some core things that haven't really changed. And we might have some sort of superficial gains, but the deep structures that instill things like class shame remain.
That's really powerful, Fran.
It's bloody depressing.
Yeah, I know. But it is, the way you talk about it is really powerful.
Oh, thanks.
Makes you listen. I don't think I'm going to ask anything else after that.
Okay.
Is there anything else that you'd like to say or talk about?
I don't know. I think I've kind of said it all already, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I kind of like to end with some hopeful, some sort of good things that are happening. And I do think the fact that people are, especially young people, are making zines and organising things themselves is really good. Like, it's kind of going, well, we could apply to the Art Council, but we might not get funding, or we're not in institutions that will support us for this, so we're just going to do it ourselves. And that stuff's really good, because there's no gatekeepers, there's no, we have to say this to satisfy this audience. It's just, and I love that. I love all these new zines that are kind of popping up with like young people, having their own magazines and doing their own distribution. I think that's really positive. And it means that cultural output from, young marginalized kids is like going off into the world, and it's seen as quite cool. So I really like that. So it's not just like only the posh kids that get to do the talking. So that's really good. That's happening now.
Excellent. We want more voices.
Yes, more voices.
We just want more voices, don't we?
Well,
more voices, different representations.
The voices exist. It's just they need to be heard.
That's what I mean. Yeah, we want to hear from more voices.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Thank you, Fran.
My pleasure. Thank you for
fantastic. No worries. You're absolutely welcome. Thank you very much. This was a Woman Up podcast series from Procreate Project. Thank you for listening to Woman Up, the podcast series by Procreate Project. Woman Up is the creation of Amy Dignam and Susan Merrick and produced by Procreate Project. To find more episodes, please visit procreateproject.com or find us on all your usual podcast platforms.